On the Level podcast, your Masonic podcast. Join the hosts Billy McIntyre and Sam Earl Sedgey as they delve into the world of Freemasonry.
Welcome back, brothers, listeners, fans, subscribers, to yet another episode of On the Level podcast. I'm with the man, the one and only, my brother from another mother, my worshipful brother, Billy McIntyre. How are you, Billy?
I'm wonderful, and I'm with Sam Earl Sedgey, which, he's a legend in more than just his mind. He's a legend in my mind, too. So we're ready to have some fun, and we're ready to have a wonderful podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Mate, I'm still glowing not only from the installation. I had a great stated meeting. Well, basically, for those just tuning in, stated meetings is when Masons meet once a month. Well, in Illinois, it's once a month, and a lot of lodges go dark in the summer, and sometimes some lodges go dark during the December period and Christmas as well. So some people do 10 months, but some people do 12 months. In England, they meet 4 times a year in most cases. In Scotland, it's like every month. So different jurisdictions have different bylaw rules from Grand Lodge and how many times you're supposed to, convene a stated meeting. And in stated meetings is your usual business. Some lodges do everything together. They go through the business of the lodge, and then they do degree work if they got candidates, or they do practice the same night. Other lodges separate those things during the month, and stuff like that. So now I've clarified a bit of what stated meetings are. It was great. We had 15 people, and there's a lot to go through. I set up a couple of committees, which were really cool. And if you want to listen a bit more into Blue Lodges or Craft Lodges, we kind of touched into that in the previous episode, and how important past masters are and their role in the lodge, and identifying them and identifying what they're really good at, and then getting their committees active and live so they can continue to be the pillars of the lodge and enable the new brethren to grow and see massive sprouts of growth in their proficiency, ritual proficiency, lodge activity during the years to come. And so it's really a pillar of work, and everyone is, helping each other. It's like, think about building a building and a temple, and you've got a lot of new guys coming in, apprentices, and they become kind of like master masons or pro builders, let's just call them, but they still need guidance, because there is about, years worth of ways of doing this particular sculpture in this building, or laying this particular foundation on this particular room, and you've got a couple of key experts who know to do various different things, but without them, things start falling apart.
I'd like to add with that. We've touched on it before, but don't fall into the trap when you've been a Mason before. I know people on here, you're obviously enthused about Masonry, or you wouldn't be spending your time listening to Masonry when you're not in the lodge. But don't fall into the trap where I see so many of these older Masons that were so good and still so good, but they say, I don't have time. I don't. Oh man, this guy, he'll never amount to anything. I'll just do it myself. Teach the younger guys, because if you don't, when you're gone, they're done. The lodge will be done.
And there's also something else that's really important. Alignment. When you're recruiting members, I think alignment is very important. It's very important to have the people kind of like the same alignment around you. Now, everyone in Frank and Nickel Lodge, number 1170, we have all different types of hobbies. We've got a guy who's a fantastic deer hunter. We've got some other guys who do other things. I'm a massive gamer. I write for the industry. I develop games. I do magazines and all sorts of things, and podcasts as well on that. I'm very involved in my industry, but at the same time, we are in the same kind of alignment, and we're kind of like a ritualist lodge, if that makes sense. We're very lucky in that sense that everyone really wants to be that kind of SAS Delta Force lodge, and the secret sauce for that in Masonry is fun and fellowship and wanting to be, wanting to get the best out of everyone and be a better version of yourself in that as well. And so it's very important to bring in people with an alignment where you can actually break bread, that you want to break bread with afterwards. You want to continue you look forward to coming and helping, I think that's really important. And when you get people who are not of the right alignment, that could be an issue. And then one thing I like about England, and again, it's not it's just something that I identified because I'm very lucky to travel, is, they have one. I remember in the episode when we talked to the most worshipful Grand Master of the state of Illinois, of free ancient accepted Masons, ancient and free accepted Masons, basically, that they have in England, they have different types of craft lodges, blue lodges. You have like hardcore ritualist lodges. You have kind of like in the middle lodges, and you've got lodges which are, very light on ritual, but, are strong on fellowship. And sometimes when you have people with certain expectations and the lodge, mentality is different. You throw someone who's coming in, but initially may not be great into getting the ritual out and becoming a ritualist and going through the chairs and doing all that stuff, and are not going to commit, but they like to be part of the fellowship and the fraternity, and everyone in life has have different points in their life where that version of themselves may not be ready for doing that, but all it is waiting at the right time in the right place for saying, oh, I'm ready to now move and going somewhere. And what's really good about that system, it's like a filter. And it's usually those heavy ritualist lodges that go on to become district grand deputies and grand wardens and grand line people and all that kind of stuff. That's to me really interesting. But my feedback is also when you're recruiting is very important. When you are trying to recruit, when you're doing the interviewing, and setting out the expectations and being honest with the people who want to join the lodges. What are the lodge's expectations? What are you looking in for, candidate? And what is also the other way? What's the candidate looking in? Do those things align? And that's very important, because when you go through that and you take the interview process and you spend time and you show how passionate you are about and the goals and the visions, and if that's something that they are into as well, or looking forward to. Yeah, this is the type of thing I've been looking forward to. I would really want to join this and, take part and learn, blah, blah, blah. That might be like, right, he's ticking all the boxes. And so, and I say this because in the business world, and there's some things that we got to learn. I've learned that it's better when you go through 100 people, let's just say, and you pick the 1 or 2, 3 or 4 guys that are going to shine, and the ones that are for that particular role. And masonry isn't for everyone, and if you take more time in the interview process and into getting to know people, because you're going to spend the rest of your lives with your brothers. So there's another aspect to this where once they become a master mason or even an apprentice, there are obligations that you have to that brother. And as a master mason, you have to meet those obligations. And so not being in alignment, a lot of times things turn out really well anyway, but there can be a lot of disharmony. There can be a lot of issues. And it creates more hassle, more work. And so
in other words, you're looking for harmony.
You're looking You're looking for candidates that will continue the harmony of the lodge. And that's very important. And so having that kind of veracity in the initial period where you're trying to recruit, or people are coming in and you're going through a recruitment process, take a bit more time in that. Find out where they're at. Find out where their head's at. Maybe this might not be the right time for these people, because maybe, in the certain things they're so busy, they can't do it. Or maybe like they're setting out their goals, like say, look, I'm really busy. I've got, 2 new kids, I've got this and this and that, and my wife and all that kind of stuff, but I really want to join. And but I really appreciate you laying it out, and you know, I want to take the opportunity going through this, but here's what I can do, and that also lays out some expectations. And so at least if the lodge knows basically that this potential brother who will become a master mason and his schedule, at least you guys are planning for it, and you're like, okay, well, we still want him because he's a great guy. And we know in the future he's going to have a lot of potential. But right now, in these couple of years, we may not see him. But at least you guys know beforehand, as opposed to you go through the degree work and you're like, because you haven't asked the right questions, where is he? Why is he not turning up? He's just gone. I don't know. Did you talk to him? I don't know. And then you kind of like forget about him. And then you just get this dues paying member. And then you never see him again. So I think
communication is essential.
Yes. And so I guess what I'm saying is communication is essential, and communicating and laying out expectations and them laying out their expectations and making sure that they align is so important, because what we've got in like Frank and Nicole Lodge number 1170 is something very special. And the reason why it's very special, it's been built and crafted over years, and they are very selective as well. So like when I was a member of 4 craft lodges before. You know, I would go in and go to these lodges and I'll do work, and I'm very excited, very enthusiastic, and then they'll make me honorary, and then they'll say, oh, do you want to join? I'm like, you know, when someone asks me, do you want to join and be a member of the lodge, that's a great honor. And a lot of these lodges are within driving distance for me, so I joined. So I was a member of 4 lodges, and then Frank and Nicole got hold of me and like, hey, and then I was like, hey, and I went to Frank and Nicole. I was so impressed. That was the first lodge I think I said I want to join, and it wasn't like, oh, okay, we know Sam. A lot of them do know me. You're in. I went through, even as a master mason, they went through their own interview process. They wanted to check, you know, why do I want to join? What are my goals? Where is my head at? You know, and then then 3 of them went and they communicated back to the brethren, and then the brethren voted me through, which was really nice. And so I liked the fact that they had their own little interview process with everyone, and just to make sure that this is the right place for the right person, that they're going to be the right fit. And, you know, I just really like that. And they laid out their kind of expectations as well. That was freaking cool. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then, you know, the rest is history. And I'm now a worshipful master. So anyhow, I just wanted to go through the first 12 minutes talking about how awesome, you know, Masonry is, and kind of like for those worshipful masters and officers who have been doing this for a long time in lodges around the world, just little nuggets of wisdom, and I'm sure you guys are going to, you know, reach out to us and give us nuggets of wisdom and how they've dealt with stuff. And for those listeners listening in, you can see how passionate we are in trying to recruit the best men to become better versions of themselves. And then once you've got that, you've got a bunch of guys who are going to dedicate themselves not only to the fraternity, but also to the community and to charity, faith, hope, and charity, and to be able to help those who are in need, those in the community who are destitute or have, you know, particular issues that we can help, you know, via charity. That's a lot of stuff that we do. So it's exciting times, and as the Most Worshipful Grandmaster said, Illinois Masonry is growing. So this is awesome. This is awesome, and it's important to get information out there, give you guys the tools that you need, and it's not really a tool, the confirmations. Most of you guys there, you know, have what me and Billy are talking about, confirmations of you're doing the right thing, you've got the right thing in your heads. Now go out there and trailblaze and bring more light to the world. But with that, is there anything else you want to add on that, Billy, before we talk about myth busting?
No, it's so important when you bring people in, not only for your lodge, but for the people bringing them in, because, you know, so many people has watched stuff like National Treasure and that, and I don't know if they really know what Masonry is about. You know, Masonry, you just need to explain the light and the treasure is inside you, and Masonry just brings that out, you know, and makes a good man better. That's what they're in there for. They're not in there to get out of speeding tickets because the cop's a Mason too. And they're not in there to, there's so many, I've heard so many things, just in the short time I've been a Mason. I'm not a 50-year member, but, I'm enthusiastic and I love Masonry. And my biggest regret is I didn't join when I was 18 because, man, Masonry's made me a better man. And I met some of the best friends that I could ever have. If it wasn't for Masonry, me and Sam would have never met. And Sam's one of the best friends I have.
Mate, Masonry has been a blessing. The men that I've met, the brotherhood that we've had all over my English brothers, my brothers in America, it's very difficult to articulate how privileged I am and how lucky I am, and how awesome good fellowship is, and the relationships that have been built, the brotherhood that's been built, a band of brothers, warrior brothers, and it's great. And when I see pictures in England of lodges and their smiles and they're getting together for those festive boards, and today I'm going to be going to St. Paul's Lodge 500 and with hopefully with brother Brett, and we're going to have some fun there and going to enjoy good times and have festivities on a festive board there and do some toastings. I'm so lucky, and Billy, you're now the most junior, but you're a past most illustrious Grand Master of Cryptic Masonry for the state of Illinois. And you threw me into kind of like on the tip of the spear, and we had so much fun last year. It's just been a blessing. It's been a great journey, and you, Herman, down there, you guys are just absolute. Herman's a massive. So Herman is a worshipful brother who runs the Masonic Scholastic Bowl, which we did the interview. So go to that one where we go to see the phenomenal things that Masonry has done in the state of Illinois, just on the Masonic Scholastic Bowl, and the humility they have behind it, and what they do is it's amazing. But
Masonry is about putting other people first.
That's right. But let's talk about Templar Myth Busting.
I have been looking forward to this one, buddy.
That's right. Templar Myth Busting. There's a lot of myths, and it came off to me. I'm not going to mention names. There are some of these big podcasts and big YouTube videos and whatever. They make these massive claims and tell these massively wild stories. And they build the Templar myth, and they build these massive ideas. But the problem is, to the uninformed, they give a version of Templary that's completely mythical and fictional. And there are some people that say, they go through the whole thing, and at the end they sit back and they say, well, actually, a lot of this, there's no evidence for this, but this is what this person says because he claims to be this and this and that. And so let's talk about a couple of things. So,
okay,
the first thing, there is a claim that the Templars went to when they went to Jerusalem, and they were given the Rock of the Dome, which on top of which basically was a mosque, but underneath that mosque basically was the second temple, allegedly the second temple of second temple of King Solomon, the Temple of King Solomon. Mm-hmm. Now, why is that important? So let's just go back real quick in history to make you guys understand where Solomon comes in. Solomon built the first great temple of Solomon, which in I want to make 1000 BC, so 1000 years before Christ, roughly around that time. That's when it was created. And what you need to understand back then with these civilizations is devotion to their god or gods at that time, because you had the monotheism pantheon, which was Judaism, and then you have the other pantheons back then where you had multiple gods, like the Phoenician gods and stuff like that, and the Roman gods and the Greek gods and all that stuff, and the Persian gods, and you can go on. Building your temple to God so you can be close to God or grow closer to your gods was huge. It was kind of like your devotion, and the more grandiose and the more epic and legendary that temple was, the more you showed you were a true believer to that particular faith. And the Temple of King Solomon was insane. They got builders and back then they had some of the best builders in the world were Phoenician builders. And so Solomon was a great diplomat. He was a great wheeler and dealer. And so he made a lot of alliances for a lot of marriages. He happened to marry over several hundred wives through alliances to make the state of Israel, his kingdom, great. And one of the friendships he built was a Phoenician king called Hiram, king of Tyre. And these were some of the greatest seafarers of that time. And having a naval fleet with all that enabled them to have access to a lot of tradable goods from other nations and their nation alone. And so with all the access and the work they did, they built the Temple of King Solomon. So you had a lot of master masons who were Phoenician, you had a lot of Israelites, and they all got together and they built this amazing temple of King Solomon. And within the Temple of King Solomon, it said, was to house the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant plays a major role in biblical texts. It was a very powerful object that did a lot of things in the trial of when Moses was leading his people to Israel, the land of the Hebrews, the Jews. And what people don't forget is Judaism kind of became a religion in the age of Enlightenment in France. Prior to that, like Islam as well, Judaism is a way of life. It's not the religion that you and me see it. They kind of like co-opted it into religion so you can have secularism. Secularism really came in via the French Revolution to a great extent. However, prior to secularism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam is a way of life. And especially in the Hebrew doctrine, it is a way of life. There are laws, Judaic laws that, were codified in the courts. Even now in Israel, all the laws are based on Judaic, laws that have been codified through the centuries. The way you conduct yourself to another Jew or to a Gentile, the way you conduct yourself to your family, there are laws and rules and regulations, and that's all codified not only in the Torah, and there are other books that they have codifications outside of the Torah and what we call the First Testament as Christians. And so there is an entire way of life, traditions, how you eat, when you fast, what you can eat, how, having two, right now in modern day Judaism, you got to have two separate fridges if you're going to have dairy, and you can't mix this and that. There is a whole structure which goes beyond religion. It goes beyond religion. It's a way of life. So when you hear a lot of people saying, I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious, what they are trying to say is that they are part of that people, and that people were from Israel, and that's the reason why they were Jewish. And so you're talking about a whole way of life, and that's very emblematical of Islam as well. Islam is not this kind of, you go to church in that reference, you go to mosque, you do your prayers, you come back, and then you live your life and you try and live it under some, a various subtext of codes. It's a way of life. Every day you are basically practicing the way you think, the way you eat, what you can eat, what you can't eat, the way the rules and regulations and your interactions with the opposite sex, the rules and interactions with your family, everything is. And we have this because, as people have heard, there are courts like Sharia courts where to settle issues, they don't use, so if they're in foreign countries which are predominantly Christian, a lot of the issues are settled in these other courts between their own communities and their own families. And so it's a way of life. It's a way to live, and it's something that you get into, and that's what Judaism was. And so the Temple of King Solomon was basically the edifice. It was the Kremlin. It was the Mecca. It was the Vatican of the whole Jewish religion. And it was built. It got basically destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, There was a fallout. Solomon, if you look at the tragic story of Solomon and how he got corrupt and how God warned him that if he builds all these, idols, which a lot of religions came in. So Israel turned into a lot of kind of didn't become secular, but because of the wives, if you go through the story in the Bible, he allowed a lot of other religions come in, and when Solomon died, the tribes of Israel split. So his son took over, but then the tribes of Israel split to the northern kingdom, and then Israel got split. And then in that sense, they became military weakened because they weren't unified. And then Nebuchadnezzar was able to basically defeat the Hebrews and take over Israel. And if it wasn't for the Persian Empire who came in, and the Persian emperor who came in and basically destroyed Nebuchadnezzar and then gave relief to the Hebrews, and then a couple of hundred years later, allowed them to rebuild the second temple of King Solomon. And so it starts with the second temple of King Solomon. Now, the second temple of King Solomon got destroyed again by the Romans because the Romans took over that part of the land and the empire, and the Hebrews had to basically be under the Roman, dominance, and the Hebrews rebelled. And as punishment, they destroyed the second temple. So when Jesus was born, and when he got crucified in, I believe, the year 30 AD, he was 30 when he died, if I'm correct, he was crucified and he was killed. Now, here's the problem. The people out there who are claiming, and I'm not going to name any names out of respect, claiming basically that the Templars went to Jerusalem, which they did. Their actual first mission was to protect the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now that kind of sounds like, that's a kind of like a crap job. They were just bodyguarding pilgrims, and that doesn't sound like a very prestigious thing to do. That sounds like a little crappy job. It actually wasn't. If you want, I think one of the earlier episodes, if I went through it, going to Jerusalem was huge. It was going to like the Vatican. It was going to where Jesus was, where Moses brought the Israelites. This is a very important thing if your whole faith is based on the New Testament and the Old Testament, basically, as a Christian. And we're talking about at the time where Christianity was codified. Constantine was, came and went, and you had a codification of what Christianity was, and it spread throughout all the Holy Roman Empire, and then it went throughout all of Europe. But at that time, Christianity was very well established in Europe, and there was a threat where the Muslims and the Muslims basically were taking over parts of Europe, and they took over the what we now call the Middle East, which was predominantly Christian. Prior to that, most of north of Africa was predominantly Christian, and they been able under the Prophet Muhammad to conquer all that parts of Spain, and even got into Italy, and so they became a massive threat. So the action to that, a couple of hundred years afterwards, was starting the Crusades. So the Crusades was a reaction to another force, another superpower coming and basically taking over Christian lands. And
can I add something real quick?
Absolutely.
With the Crusades, and I know, and dig into this yourself, because this is something I'm very passionate about. So many times anti-Christians use the Crusades to bash the Christians and say, well, this is how, Christians has been evil, and here's proof. Look what they've done to all these people. There's a lot more to it than that. There might have been some horrific acts that shouldn't have happened. I'm not, there's that and everything you see. But the Crusades was basically trying to get back what they've lost from a different culture. This isn't nothing negative against the Muslims. I don't mean it that way. But that's basically the war between the Christians and the Muslims was the Crusades. And they're trying to both keep their way of life.
Yeah, and there was tit for tat. Like there were some things both sides did, which were like, insane. Like you can go forward a bit and go to Ottoman Empire, where they would take Christian boys, orphans, basically, after they've taken over places, and then they will basically become slave soldiers and then into the best soldiers called Janissaries, and they will convert them into Islam. And so what you've done is it's kind of like wild in a certain way, is you indoctrinate all these young boys, turn them into, faith-based, Islamists, and then you train them to become the best Janissaries, and then guess who they're fighting? The very Christians that they were raised and born to, through their families. And then when you look at it, like, well, that's pretty hardcore. And as you said, there were Christians, that shamefully did acts of barbarity to Muslims, and history is littered with that. Well, regardless of faith or religion or empire, whether it's the pagan gods, and the Romans did some horrible things, and all sorts of things. It's just and it's not really the religion or the faith; it's the people. It's people using the faith and the religion to do that. One great thing about Freemasonry, if we can just pause 1 second, is that, and it's something that I love, is there's a couple of things you don't discuss, and this is what brings people together from all faiths and religions, and it's the fact that we don't talk politics. That brings a lot of people together, and and we don't talk about religion. And that's very important, and that builds that tolerance. But we're talking about the myth busting of the Knights Templars. So what am I getting at? Where is the myth busting? So there are claims that have been articulated through the internet, and that we're here to bust, is that, the Templars came, they took over the Second Temple of King Solomon, the Rock of the Dome, and they excavated, and that's all they did. All they did was excavate. And when they excavated, they found the bones of Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, the Ark of the Covenant, the Spear of Christ, and all that kind of stuff. There's a problem with that. Problem number one, if you didn't get it, is Jesus Christ. Why, after demolishing the Second Temple, would the Hebrews, who at that point and still today believe that Jesus wasn't a good prophet, he wasn't the true Messiah? That's a dispute between Hebrewism and Christianity, the massive distinction, basically. And so why would they put his bones, and why would they put John the Baptist, who was killed for his belief? Why wouldn't they, when he was killed and the Romans killed him, why would they then put him in the the Second Temple? Why would they put the spear? This is completely anathema to what because you have to remember the split between the Hebrews. The Hebrews became Christians. This was kind of like a civilizational, religious civil war that the Hebrews who became Christians, kind of like, and then the pagans then became Christians. And so it was born out of Judaism to a great extent, because Jesus was a rabbi, John the Baptist was, and a lot of them were rabbis at that time. That it was 2.0 Judaism, and there was a flock that rejected it, and there was a flock that basically accepted it, and then you got Christianity. And so to have Jesus's remains in a place where he was rejected, that make any sense whatsoever historically, if you want to link it all. And so it fits the reason why they need that thing to fit is there is this argument of Christian Gnosticism. It fits the Christian Gnosticism idea of a different version of Christianity, which basically says, there is a duality. There is the masculine and the feminine. There's this other way, and the one that was taught from the church and through the Constantine is all kind of like false. And the problem with Christian Gnosticism and its origins is it doesn't stack up with history. So, for example, as I said, why would the tip of spear be in the Second Temple? Right. And the remains of Jesus, which we know historically was put in the cave, and then there's the argument of the resurrection, basically, and the apostles died for that. Whether you believe in that or not is not the case here. I'm not trying to state any case, but I'm saying, they didn't bury him in the second temple. It doesn't make any sense, because at that time, the Hebrew religious orders, they found Christianity an anathema to their own way of life. It was an anathema because, it was a whole new way of doing things compared to the Judaic way. There's a lot of differences between Judaism and Christianity, fundamental differences, and you can just look at both and see how different those two things are. And I've gone through that a bit with the way Judaism is seen as a way of and what they do compared to what a lot of Christians do. So why would they suddenly take that and then Mary Magdalene's remains, and why would it be in the second temple? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It makes no sense why they buried it there. Now, what does make sense is a possibility of having the Ark of the Covenant there, because one of the main things of the Ark of the Covenant was if the Hebrews were able to hide the Ark of the Covenant, which they probably did do after when Nebuchadnezzar came and they were at the gates, they probably did secrete it in the mountains or somewhere. Maybe Mount Moriah, somewhere there, maybe, and there is an argument for that. That makes sense. And then they're moving it once they rebuilt the second temple, and putting the Ark of the Covenant back where it was, and whatever the Ark of the Covenant was, and then I'm not going to speculate what it was in this episode. There's a lot of mythology about it. A lot of people say it's a divine source of holy power, communication to the creator, God, basically. Some say it's an energy capacitator, which has got advanced tech. Some people say it's it's exactly what it says in the Bible and does everything it can do in the Bible. Some say it stores a lot of ancient artifacts. So that's the first myth busting. But the only reason why they're making the connection is to convince people about Christian Gnosticism, which is completely different towards the Christianity that we have known and the established Christianity that we know. And so that's why you fall short on the evidence. And the next thing is...
I think people always want to bend, whether it be religion or anything, they want to bend the reality to fit them instead of conforming to what they believe in. They want what they believe in their heart to be the absolute truth. So they concoct these things to make themselves more legitimate, if you will.
Well, so Gnosticism really became a thing through the Renaissance period, and where ideas were taken and people didn't have a lot of information because and then occults were created and all sorts of things were going on. There were lots of schisms. There's a lot of schisms in Christianity. But let's go through some more myth busting. So there's that problem. The myth busting of, the Templars came and they excavated and they found the truth about this, and then they had this power of the Vatican. No, there was no power. The reason why the Knights Templars historically were given amazing rights, and they only basically were to give the nod from the Pope, and that's the only person they really basically were given orders by, was the fact that this was fundamentally the Catholic Church wanted to have control to a certain extent, and and if you've got religious fanatic monks, warrior monks on your side. Let's just say that the kings of Europe and the despots of Europe, or the tyrants of Europe, will be a bit more wary of doing a lot of unchristian things and getting away with breaking Christian laws, basically, or rising up against, say, the Vatican. And that's what Philip the Fair technically did. For him to get himself out of the claws of the Vatican, the power of the Pope, he kind of killed the Pope. Pope Boniface, and installed his mate, which they were mates, Pope Clement, who never went to the Vatican. It was one of the biggest untold historical schisms that was never really taught about, because a lot of this was suppressed for centuries because of the embarrassment and that led to the breakup of Catholicism. We'll go through that in the opposite episodes. In Protestantism, it was less than 100 years where things started to break down after the fall of the Templars, because this was and the other thing that breaks it down was, to claim that these guys, and the claim then is they weren't really Christians as Catholics. But there's a problem with that. The problem is, to be a knight, you had to be a noble. And I went through, how many sons nobles would have and all that kind of stuff. So in effect, the Templars or the Hospitallers and all these things, they were the sons of Europe. And we have documents where Templars would do 10-year service or 15 years, and they get to an age where if they've survived and they lived, they kind of like, I've done my Templarism, I want to go back and start a family if they could. And some of them did. And they mingled with society. So if you were going to have this secret society of Gnosticism and heresy and all this blasphemy and whatever, it would have been found out within years, because commanderies were everywhere. They were scattered across the entire place. Templars were not just warrior monks. They literally had agricultural land. They had timber building services that they made. So they had timber serving services where they had their own woodcutters. And so I went through this in the previous episode for episode 3 of the Templars. Go into that. I go through all that basically. So these practices would have come out. And here's the thing. We have the Chenon parchments. The Chenon parchments from the Vatican that absorbed the Clement in the end, even though he was a puppet pope, once you're pope, you have all these powers. You kind of like say, well, and he literally figured out that, this Philip the Fair was a madman. He was a bit of a nutter, and he was just power hungry, and he absolved them. Now, why would you absolve not only just heretics, but apparently heretics that had a completely different faith-based system, who technically weren't Christians of the Catholic faith? Why would you suddenly absolve them when they went through all this torture and the bishops looked into them like, no, this is not true. Everything they were saying were lies. They absolved them, like clemency, absolute clemency. So the reason why you give clemency is because it wasn't true.
Sure. And it's a shame that those all got buried instead of letting that come out.
Yeah, because they were done. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they was true, then the Pope would have been like, oh my God, yes, they were heretics and we found out and yada, yada, yada. And, the French, but it wasn't true. And you define, objecting the sons of Europe, and a lot of them went underground because they were the sons of the noble houses of Europe, and so it wasn't like they just went away. They didn't send messages to the noble houses who ran Europe under the kings, like, Dad, this is what I did, Dad. And then remember, all of these Knights Templars who joined the service, they joined for God. These were very religious noblemen, noble sons, who gave their life to God and also the art of war and to defend Christianity. And how many of those would have, when they found out in the higher ranks or whatever, or the monarchy you want to put in, would have rejected that, and there would have been civil war? So within this, and there wasn't any. It was so. There is that debate. Now let's talk about Roslin Chapel real quick. I want to touch base on Roslin Chapel real quick, if that's okay, because that's another thing that they bring up. Roslin Chapel is another myth busting. So I'm going to go through it. So Roslin Chapel was founded in the year 1446 by Sir William St. Clair as a family chapel. Construction was ongoing when St. Clair died in 1484. Okay, so well over 40 years, the chapel was still being built. Okay, and while his son completed the parts of the design, the original plan was never fully realized. It was only in the 18th century where they started to complete parts of the chapel. So this was an ongoing project for several centuries that was added to, and stuff was added and stuff wasn't added and all that kind of stuff. The Templars, the Order of the Templars and the Crusades and the Templar commanderies and the Templar churches were built way before 1446. 1446 is, you're talking about well over 100 years when the Templars were officially disbanded in quotation marks, because I have, I can go through the fact that they continued, factually. I'm going to go through those episodes, but they didn't build this thing during the time. And then here's the other thing: when you go to the actual commanderies or the priories of the Knights Templars around the world, you go to Temple in England, you go to the actual commandery in Scotland, where Rosslyn Chapel's near to, is now a ruin. And you see a rock formation going in a circle that goes up to your knees. And if you go to ones that are surviving, they're very humble in terms of there isn't this crazy architecture of pagan stuff all around. If you go to Temple London, it's very solemn, it's very humble, it's very emblematical of the Knights Templars. It was built as a military. Some places were built for military fortifications. They're some of the most beautiful buildings, but they were built for purpose. So if there was a Templar military fortress, it was built as a military fortress. If they wanted to build a massive underground network under a city, which they did in Acre, they built it for military purposes or whatever. If they want to build the commanderies and chapels, you built it, but it was very Christian. There wasn't these pagan stuff. And so everyone points to Rosslyn Chapel because it's been glamorized in the Da Vinci Code movies as, oh, this is a Knights Templar place, where this was built well over 100 years before the order. It wasn't built in the time of the Crusades. It wasn't built in the early times. It wasn't even built in what some people claim is the end times of the Knights Templars, which was 1314, when officially they were disbanded, and they were basically Jacques de Molay was burnt on the stake. And so that's another myth busting. Now, I just said Sir William St. Clair basically started building in 1446. It took he died in 1484, and then it says the construction was ongoing when St. Clair died in 1484. So it was still going on, and while this son completed parts of the design, the original plan was never. So we're talking about a 60-70 year process of building this family chapel that now is supposed to be a Knights Templar chapel. Now, right. What you'd have to realize is in the 18th century there were parts that completed the chapel and stuff like that, but you're in the age of Renaissance. You're in the age of the occults. You're in the age of secret societies claiming different things. You're in the age of people being able to travel more and get all sorts of fantastical information from different parts of the world and mythologies. And then you're able to bind those mythologies and create things out of them, like the little green man everyone talks about. So, and they say, oh, it's because they have little green man statues in the Rosslyn Chapel and they've got all these different pagan stuff. Therefore, the Templars were pagans, which Rosslyn Chapel's got nothing to do with the Knights Templar. Now, it's got some very interesting things, but that could be something that was built over years. And you got to remember, there was a massive resentment in England over the Catholic Church, and at that time it was a Protestant country. And there were, if you look at the occults, the history of the occults and all that kind of stuff, and what we call the paganism and all that kind of stuff, there were areas that was practicing that kind of stuff. And paganism, like with all mythologies and with all some stuff that never goes away. And then some aristocracies or some cults and some people did practice that. We know the Hellfire Club, in London that, was very famous, and all the members died very, very quickly because of their promiscuity back then. But my point being, Billy, is the problem we have today is people say things and we take their things for word, and we don't go and say, well, okay, the question is, when was Rosslyn Chapel built? Okay, when was the height of the Knights Templars and everything that they built, and the banking system they did, all that kind of stuff? How does that relate to? Well, hold on a second. It doesn't. It's got nothing to do with the Templars. Now, there are Templar signs. It could be that Sir William St. Clair initially was a Knights Templar, and it continued, and it could be that some family member in the centuries, once completing it, added his own interpretations through what I call corruption fed into the Renaissance period, where all sorts of things were practiced within fraternal societies and stuff like that. And
well, what the danger with some of this stuff is, most of the time, every legend and every tall tale, whatever you want to call it, there is a nugget of truth there. So if you circle back even farther enough on what you're talking about, were the Templars trying to save the holy artifacts? Yes, probably so. And it just people just keep building on that, and everybody wants this sensationalism. And if you come up with some big whopper of a story, everybody's going to pay attention to you because they're wanting this to be this larger than life thing. And that's how I feel with anyway.
Absolutely. So you're very poignant. The Templars did have something. I think, I don't know what. They did have something. They had some sort of they were able to excavate some sort of art. Now, some people argue that it's again, it's in the Vatican. The Vatican's got it. They know what's going on. The conspiracy theories. Some people argue that the Templars kept it and they took it to the Americas. Whatever it is, what we do know is that they did pick up a lot of knowledge, which is the craft knowledge, through the Cistercian monks, basically, and their way of. And I went through the Cistercian monks and the whole importance of them building their own self-sufficient economies, and that was a practice the Templars took on, like the ethics of work. And if you're not going, praying and actually having a job and doing something and being good at the job and improving that job, and then you start innovating in that particular industry that you're in that job, and so they did pick up stuff. The craft guilds did have a connection with the Templars, and I went through a bit of that in the previous thing. And they kind of like some people argue that Freemasonry is from Templarism, and that there are strong quotations. There are strong links with that. For example, the lodges are dedicated to Saint John the Baptist, who's also one of the saints that the Knights Templar followed, basically. There was a sense of a military period of the craft, which was the Knights Templars to an extent, and then I guess to an extent a demilitarization of the craft within the lodges they created. But there was also always still the military order, which we've codified in around the world, called what we call the York Rite, or Mark Mason's Hall in England. And so there was a military order for Christians to join in the craft, and so that's something that's very interesting to talk about in episodes. But I just wanted to be able to bust some of these fundamental myths that get espoused over the internet, and then the premise of all of these espousements and saying, look at the pagan stuff and look at this stuff and and what it means, is the theory, and it's a theory that they discovered an ancient civilization called the Atlanteans, and it was the mystic brothers of the East that they met that gave this information, and the Templars were trying to get more of this information and find out how all these all this ancient civilization, this ancient technology worked, and they lived millions of hundreds of thousands of years ago, and a great cataclysm befell this technological civilization. There are problems with that. And that's been disputed. And we'll leave scholars and technology and all that kind of stuff that we're discovering to at that point. My issue is with all that is there's one thing that that doesn't change at all, and it's called gold. Gold is the one thing on earth that if you leave it, it's there for time immemorial. It doesn't rust. If there was this great civilization, right, and gold being something that's very useful in terms of whether it's conducting some sort of electricity. Look at the iPads. The iPads use bits of gold. A lot of our tech use layers of gold. Where is something from that age that gold has kept, whether it's an artifact, a sculpture, something that you can predate, something that's been inscribed, something that looks very weird but out of place. There's none of that. Gold's a very good thing, and people have been excavating gold for a long time, and we haven't found one piece of gold, whether it's a part of a tech, whether it's a tablet, whether it's an inscription, whether it's a technological gadget that goes on people's hands or whatever it is. There's none of that. Come on, man, come on. So in my head, it's like I have a few doubts. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't. I'm not saying that it's a theory, and it's a theory I love. I'm a big guy. I love theories. I love, exploring things. But there's a difference between a theory that this could have happened and what we factually know did happen. And what's very dangerous is to take these theories and make it fact, and then change fundamental things about, let's just say, the historical origins of Christianity. And that's where I fundamentally look into this. I'm not looking into this from a religious concept. I'm not a very religious, but I am a Christian, but I'm not very religious at all. Compared to the people that I know around me. But for me, it's, what was Christianity? What was Judaism? What was Hebrewism? And being someone who's kind of very neutral, but as a Christian, being able to deep in and really appreciate the historical conjunctures of these faith-based things and how they immersed and dominated entire civilizations, and not just those three faith-based. I'm a huge fan of the Roman gods and the Greek gods, and all that mythos and all that kind of stuff is just fascinating, and how that related to the function of those particular societies as well, and how that from the Roman soldier who tied his shoes and made a prayer to the god of shoes and stuff like that the Romans had.
Yeah.
So my point being is, the important thing is being able, as master masons and as layman public who are listening in, to not get sidetracked by all this mythos and all these conspiracy theories that they're trying to say this is the fact. If it is factual, show the evidence. And no evidence has been brought up. Still, a lot of bold statements have been made, and a lot of kind of connections have been made, but I've just debunked them. I've debunked how unlikely it's very. I'm not saying, here's the thing. It's like, what I'm trying to say is highly unlikely they would have stored all those ancient parts of John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene,
right,
Jesus in the Second Temple of King Solomon. Well, the Hebrews would not have gone for that whatsoever. And why would the Romans do that? The Romans who control that, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It is likely that the Ark of the Covenant and relics of that time when the first temple and second temple were created were in vaults and secret places in the Rock of the Dome where the second temple was. I say, well, that in the likely rector is, it's possible. It is very possible. It's very possible that they found, but how did they find John the Baptist's head? That's why I'm trying to scratch my head.
There would have been no reason to keep that,
right? Or his skull or whatever. Now maybe they did. I don't know, but it definitely was in the Second Temple, and that's where people are falling flat to bring this Gnosticism and this Atlantean theory abound without any evidence. And so, it detracts people away from the fundamental core that you had good men who were faith-based in the Pacific religion, and in this case, it happened to be Christianity, and these were God-fearing men who were fanatical devotees who gave their life to God, just like the Bushido, the monks. Basically, there was a religious fanatic a sect in Japan who had these massive naganatas, and they were just dangerous. They had no armor. They were very lightly armored, but they had massive, and they were dangerous. So dangerous that Nobunaga basically had to wipe them out because these guys. And again, it goes to the same theory. They if you have a military unit in that age that would have to die to the last man for you to win, they are very, very, very dangerous. And you like to say, well, Sam, why is that? Well, you have to remember back then, the art of killing was kind of like minimal to an extent, because you can only fire an arrow every, couple of seconds, and you only had an X amount of arrows because of the production of arrows. That's number one. Second of all, arrows weren't like machine guns. A machine gun can fire an insane amount of bullets within seconds. Even a pistol today can fire an insane amount of bullets within seconds, much faster than an arrow can, and it's much more dangerous. So you didn't have that. You don't have these mass-killing machine weapons. You don't have missiles and bombs that can just decimate entire cities, right? You had a blade. And the blade can kill as much as you can kill. And hey, you get anyone in hand-to-hand combat for 10 to 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and they're soaking in sweat. There's something called fatigue where you start to slow down. You have knights in plate armor on top of that. You get the exhaustion can run. I mean, obviously, yes, they're burly, big men or whatever, but still, you're talking about humans who catch fatigue, who get tired. And so the art of killing, although it happened on wide scales, wasn't as destructive to a certain extent as a modern way of the art of killing through military firepower. Our firepower, even if you go back to black powder weapons, the reloading of a black powder weapon, the amount it takes to fire a flintlock rifle, and then you've got to then put your pouch of gunpowder inside, and you've got to get your rod inside and get that ready, and then you've got to ignite it and all that. From that, which takes minutes to do, to a pistol now that can go boom, 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 to an automatic that does even more, to then, war fighting that, with all the other technology and weapons of destruction we have. It's a whole different world, and we tend to forget that. And my point is that when you've got a man who's not willing to die, and you've got to kill every single last one of them because of their God, whichever religion, it's a very, very, very frightening thing, and they become, and that's why they dedicate themselves. So they're not just a bunch of random guys who just can wave swords. They're trained SAS Delta 4 killers of their age, who are super well armored. So stuff like arrows, they can survive against with their shields and their armor. You got another thing coming. So my point being is we kind of be careful of the fantasy element that people like to bring, and look at the fact. If someone states a fact, I'll say, there was this place in Spain which had the same thing. Well, hold on a second. Okay, there is a link between that place, but when was that added on? Could it be that?
Yes.
Because there was a time, and when I call it the Renaissance period, and there was a time of great imagination. You look at all the artifacts, all the architecture, everything that's built, and there were cults. Cults were made in terms of the occult, or cults, or religious cults, or different types of cult, or different types of denominations. There are denominations today in Christianity that another Christian will look at and these guys are super weird. These guys are mad. And then the other guys will look at them like, these guys are mad, right? And so and then you've got the fraternal societies that kind of exploded. There was the Masonic ones, and there were other ones that kind of exploded throughout. And some of these places had to have a bit of mythos. Some of these places, if you want to reject Christianity as it is, but you want to still have some tenets of Christianity, you have to build a mythos. Now,
to draw people in.
Now, there were the Cathars. There were Gnostics back then, Cathars, that had a different edge of Christianity, who were basically killed by other Christians. There was a split when they got the Council of Nicaea, and when they built basically this, and they left a lot of text out. There are books that were left out. But here's the thing: today, when you go on, there are people that are much more smarter than me, who have gone on to big shows around the world and have factually said, well, we've found out that this is false. This book is false. And the reason why sometimes things are left out is the veritas. And there are people there who have spent their lives trying to verify all these books and texts to see if they are true. And a lot of these people that go on, the only channel I see is the Gaia channel, and say these things. They've already dispelled a lot of the books that they rely on to say these myths. And I understand. And you were very poignant, Billy. You were like, well, people try to create instead of following a faith, whatever faith it is, they like to create the faith to fit them. And I think that's the problem that we've fallen into, and that's where we get these great and entangled myths about the Knights Templars. And we're going to have more episodes.
Well, And we're in an age now where a normal story of the Knights Templar, how has that become boring? But so they want to make it. Hollywood has made everything so sensationalism. Back in the even the even in the 40s and 50s, an explosion that they would have had in the 1940s and 50s, people went, "Oh my gosh, that's nothing anymore."
Yeah.
That's this. They want sensationalism. They want everything to be bigger than life, and so they can just be entertained by it. So that's why I think episodes like this is so important. Guys, knowledge is power.
Knowledge is
Don't
power.
don't let some other nut job, if you will, tell you what to think. Dig into it. Don't believe everything we say. Dig into it. Say, yeah, they were right about this. Or, maybe if we're wrong, contact us. Say, hey, you're wrong, and here's my proof. We love that. We want to learn. We don't want to fall into the same thing, and we don't want you to fall into this madness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing you said, in this age, you were very lucky where you can start to learn. You can start to do the research. You can check different parts of, actual facts and when this was built or when that was built, coming directly from the source. But that's the funny thing. Like Rosalind Chaplin, what I've just told you is exactly from the Rosalind Chaplin website.
Right.
The actual history. This is, but the problem is, and again, the Rosalind Chaplin guys, they never claim anything. They're like, yeah, this is kind of strange and it's kind of weird and it brings a lot of tourism in and people appreciate it and it is magnificent. But the problem is that the sensationalism took over. The Da Vinci Code was that, and now it's become people are believing in a lot of stuff, and that kind of affects sometimes the way we think, and especially Knights Templars like myself and yourself who take the order very seriously. It's important to have these fantastic discussions. It's important to debate these things, but the more you have experts that there are some great English historians that are coming out with all this and are breaking all the historical parts down, not just on Knights Templars but just on history and going through it. It's just phenomenal, and so it's there now. We're in an age of where there is false information out there. Instead of sitting back and being a consumer and being entertained, go and look into the history. Go and see how cool that period, cool from history, whether it's the Ottoman Empire, whether it was the Knights Templar Crusades, whether it was the Roman Empire, whether even the Temple of King Solomon that we'll get into at some point, from a historical angle. All of this is awesome about how do we link the Temple of Solomon to Templars. Now, what we haven't talked about, I remember it's just myth busting, is a link between the Temple of King Solomon and Templarism. What was passed down. Again, another big, massive myth-busting thing is, and please, guys, send me authentic pictures because I spent years looking into this. In Masonry, right angles are very important. We all know this as Masons, right? There are no right angles in the pyramids. The pyramids, there are no right angles. They're pyramids, right? Mm-hmm. There is no right angle. And then you look at all the pictures, the hieroglyphs the Egyptians are. And my biggest thing was, and again, these are things that, as a master mason, you'll find out once you go through the degree work. The symbolisms, the pass signs and the codes, there's nothing there. When you look at it, nothing is there in terms of the hand signs and all that kind of, cool stuff that we get to learn. It's not there. So you've got to find links between, the Masons and the builders and our heritage. And I can trace back as close as I can factually to the time of the first Temple of King Solomon. Beyond that, as I've always said to many people, it's extremely difficult. And so they've got a lot of theories, but they're not facts. There's a lot of sensationalism that we've came from the Egyptians. And now it could be, one could argue, that the craft, the technology of masonry and building and craft was passed down through different civilizations, through different tribes and through different peoples. That makes sense. But there wasn't this, the idea that, from what I know now, that we have a heritage from Egypt. Now, we may have adorned that in many of our places, and even the masonry may have put, a lot of Egyptology stuff in our places, because there was a massive fascination back then, and many of our archaeologists back then were Masons, and there was.
And you got to think people borrow ideas. You see something, you think this is the most cool thing in the world, whether that be.
That's it.
I went over to Sam's house and it was decorated with medieval war stuff. It's not, but and man, that was the coolest thing I ever see. I got to get some of that, so because I think it's cool, and that's what they did. That's just like what you talked about with the different symbols that were added later. People think that's cool. Well, we'll put that on there too. All it takes is 2 or 3 people in power to make something like that happen. Where the original builders would have said, oh, "You're disgrace. This is a disgrace. You're defacing our, a monument to God, if you will." But it doesn't take much to change stuff.
Absolutely. So that's kind of like, I've got more, but we're kind of like running out of time. But just to bring out a few of those things. Now, there are things which are really interesting. Again, there's a duality with me where when it gets to facts. There are things when it comes to Edward III and Templarism and the continuation of the Knights Templars, the fact that he changed the regalia to St. George's Cross, the highest knightly order before the Victorian Cross was Edward III's Order of the Garter, which was a Knights Templar shield with a knightly belt over it. There were a lot of, there's a lot of facets there. There's one guy, a great historian, which I love. I think his name is Dan. I can't remember Dan. It's not Dan Brown, but it's somewhere close to that. But I read his book, and then I watched lots of interviews what he's talking about, and he suggests that Henry V, if he had not died at the age of 35 because of dysentery, there will be, he would have initiated another crusade into the Holy Land, because he would have unified England and France together after the French king would have died, because he died about 6 months before the French king, and there was an agreement that the French king died, the French king will pass everything to him. If he unified these two powerhouses together, oh my God, it would have been the most powerful Christian force the world had ever seen, and the other kings would have united, and he would have gone through a crusade. That's what he was thinking. Now, he's not even thinking about it through the eyes of the Knights Templars, but there's something else interesting, saying, hey, and then when you look at the records of a lot of kings, Christian kings, a lot of them died strangely from something called dysentery, and we forget. Again, this is getting speculative. Now, I'm not saying this is fact. Speculative. So there's a bit of theory in this. This is where I get excited. It's like, well, is there a place near in North Africa or close to the Middle East where the Hashishin were involved, where there were seeds and stuff like that if ate would cause dysentery? And lo and behold, I believe it's near Egypt, and around that area there is a crop, a little seed, that if you do eat it, it will cause dysentery and it will kill you. And although they claim that the Hashishin were masters of assassination through a dagger, they were also masters of alchemy and poisons as well, and they developed that. And so the problem is that when you have a powerful king, and the Hashishin were a network that they didn't have a powerful army, they didn't have massive fortresses, because since the Mongols basically destroyed their HQ a long time ago, the question is, did the Hashishin really disappear? Because they had a network all around all around the Holy Land. But to say that the Hashishin didn't operate within Christendom, that's a tall order. They could have operated. Their mission was to take out the heads of the snakes, whether that was Sunni leaders, which they did, Sunni Muslims because they were Shia, or whether it was Christians, whatever threatened Islam and the Holy Land to an extent. And that's not including that if it wasn't the Hashishin, those who did deal in poisons. There's a reason why they had cooks that would taste food before.
Right.
Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was poisoned by a French, the French who couldn't take on this great king and this great warrior king, they had to kill him off. Otherwise, he would have taken all. I'm not saying this is all, but the fact that dysentery,
something to consider.
The fact that there was, if it was just a one-off, I wouldn't mind. But there's a lineage of Christian kings. Now it could be the fact that it was just dysentery. They just had something bad. But you're ruling out poison. You're ruling out assassinations, which were big back in those days, and you're ruling out certain particular cults like the Hashashin that were feared not only across Islam but also in Christianity, and had a massive tit for tat with the knightly orders, and to an extent, apparently some say at times worked together. And anyhow, that's all really interesting stuff that we can get into in the.
Well, I know we're really short on time, but the one I hear the most, and I'd like you to debunk it because you have looked into it so much. How many people think that the Templars were worshiping false gods, if you will? Well, there's famous.
Oh, you mean Baphomet?
Yeah.
So yes, I actually went into this. So Baphomet, and I went there and actually did a lecture on this because it was just profound. You found out that the whole thing is just it's not true.
It's garbage.
It's garbage because a lot of people say the Baphomet is the origins of the devil. It's not. Baphomet actually, the origins of that is the Phoenicians who prayed to Baal. It's a corruption basically, and Baal basically was a Phoenician god of one of many, and there was no correlation between Baal and what Baal basically was in charge of and everything, worshipping Baal and all the sacrifice for Baal, and anything heretical about and then the what do you call it? The Knights Templars worshipping this goat head thing called Baal. That kind of thing was completely the fact that they would pee on the cross and all that kind of stuff. Oh, and they did it because they wanted to show. Here's the thing. A lot of people on the other side would say the mythologists, and I call the conspiracy theorists.
Sure.
They'll say, oh, they would piss on the cross because they wanted to show, in case they got captured by Saladin or the Islamists or the Muslim armies. But here's the thing. Saladin, we have record that Saladin captured over 200 Templars and a massive Christian army, let the other Christian army members go, and decapitated the 250 Knights Templars because these were the guys who would not give in. These were the crazy Christian fanatics that fought for God and would not do something like piss on the cross. Why would you? So what? So they would piss on the cross and say, "Hey, we're not really, Christians, and let us go because we're not really based in the faith." And no. So Saladin killed them because he respected them and he feared them. He said he doesn't want to fight them on the battlefield again. These were holy, godly men of God who worshiped God and Christ, and they were devout monks. They were part of they were the military arm, I guess, of the Cistercian order, where Saint Benedict basically, a lot of the Templar code is based on the Cistercian code that Saint Benedict wrote for the Templars. And that was a codex, and that was their way of life. That's how they lived. Like when I said about way of life stuff about Islam, and the same thing about the Templars. They had this codex, and this is how they lived. And they were very strict with that codex. And there was a very strict Christian codex. So to say that, and again, clemency, the Channon Parchment, the Pope, if they did believe in this demon worshipping thing called Baal, which you trace it back, goes to Phoenicians, so it's all nonsense basically. And I did an actual in-depth lecture on that. Then okay, there's a thing there, and again the homosexuality thing that was false. It was all false. Yeah. It was there to discredit the Pope's army. It was there to discredit the powerhouse of Christendom that basically kept the Holy Land at to one point interacted, and they were planning to go for a second thing. What that whole schism was basically is you had a tyrant called King Philip the Fair who wanted the crown, basically, which is him. He believed he was ordained by God. He wanted to rule without the Catholic Church impeding on every single bloody thing that he wanted to do. So for example, attacking a Christian kingdom was a no-no unless they were excommunicated by the Pope. There was a lot of rules that you can't do, and so Philip was building the first autocratic state under the crown, and the biggest problem he had was, number one, the Catholic Church, and second, the Templars, because not only were they funding him to a lot of respects, but it was more than money. When you have a huge fortress in your city, one of the biggest fortresses, the Templar Commandery, basically, when you look at your palace, looking at you, saying, "We are here to keep you true to God," and they are very powerful. He didn't want an uprising. He didn't want the Templars organizing, his enemies to take him out, because they were fierce in battle. They were dangerous seasoned veterans of countless sieges and assaults through the Holy Land, which they left. These were expert military warfare. They had the biggest navy fleet, so they would lend their fleets to a king like the King of England or whatever, and they would crush him. The Templars to Philip the Fair were a massive military threat if he went against the Vatican, which he did. He killed. So think about the lineage. He killed Pope Boniface. He attacked Denogre. He sent his lackeys and Denogre down, and they literally he was beat up so bad. He was literally abused so bad physically that when the town itself, the people rebelled to save the Pope, and they did save the Pope. 8 days later, he died of his wounds. They killed. This is what people don't understand. Philip the Fair and Denogre killed a pope, and they replaced the pope with a puppet pope called Clement, who never went to the Vatican, right? Who had no power,
right?
And even when they gave the Templars clemency, like the Pope, this is the man who says, "You are absolved of your sins, my son." He is a top dog, right? Even when they were absolved, Philip the Fair was like, "No, we're still gonna kill them, and we're gonna disband." And so Clement was forced to disband the Knights Templars after all that time. And remember, it took 7 years from the accusation in 1307 to 1314. It wasn't. This was nearly a decade-long process, a fight, a tit for tat. It wasn't like he got his way, and in the end, Philip the Fair was like, "No." And he was a dangerous man. Well, if you can kill one pope, you can kill.
He can kill another one.
And Clement, he didn't want to die. He was trapped. He couldn't leave the country. So that's what people got to understand, that when you had the Inquisition, and then when you had these false accusations about the witches and about this worship, and then people were using it as propaganda to take out their competition or someone they didn't like, that's what happened on the mass scale, and that created a massive schism. It sent shockwaves throughout Christendom, because the King Edward III didn't believe it. The German king didn't believe it. They knew exactly what was going on. They knew all, because remember, the sons of Europe, the Knights Templars, the Knights, not the Templar sergeants, but the Knights were the sons of Europe, the nobility houses, and it's not true. It's not true, and so and we know that because I've just explained the facts. And so, and then not only that, I had to get into stuff where, if people were doing some sort of acts, that would have led it into a lot of, health issues that they don't have modern medicine.
Right.
Their practices would have wiped them out, because STDs would kill you. Like whether you're whoring with women or you're whoring with men or whatever it is, you are going to develop these STDs. And so you're talking about an order which had this profound effect through Christendom. It was the light, in terms of what they did. And then that went all crashing down, and then they went underground. And then I'm looking forward to doing some more future stuff. But yeah, so the Baphomet thing, and again, see, the reason why I got a bit passionate about that, you could tell there was a bit of passion, a bit of anger about that, is that's one of the things that held me back from Masonry. All of these conspiracies. And when I joined the order, there was a bit of worried. In my 20s, I was very interested in joining Freemasonry. And one of the things that held me back, and one of my biggest regrets, was the conspiracy theories, was all this fallacy. I am now a Knights Templar. of this order, and then also the Sovereign Military Order of Jerusalem, of the Masonic Order, and another order. I didn't do any of that. If the spitting on the cross and this Baphomet crap and all this rubbish, it's all rubbish. It's rubbish. Now I can't tell you.
That's why I thought it was very important that you cover that, because a lot of people are scared of that.
Yeah, I can't tell you what we do in the ritual, which is beautiful and it's freaking awesome. But there's none of that nonsense. There's no
disrespect to God or any gods.
No. There's none at all. Not one iota. And the problem we have is, we have an obligation. See, we're in a catch-22. We can't talk about it because that's part, And so we've had people like Goebbels was great, the Nazi propagandist. Goebbels was great in bringing out a lot of mythology and all this nonsense, and even Masonry. We'll talk about that historically as well, and how Masonry had to go underground because they killed 200,000 Freemasons in Germany, Hitler's Nazi Germany, and they hated Freemasons because Freemasonry was a threat to Nazi Germany. Freemasonry in any free part of the world, I'm going to put it this way. In any free part of the world where there is meritocracy, where there is equality among people, where there is equality amongst your fellow man, Freemasonry is there. In any autocracy and tyranny today, Freemasonry is still banned, and that's still a lot of places around the world. So my point being is, that take that to the bank. And all those mythologies has not been good for our name. But then again, you have to understand that, with the exception of the past 70 years, we were in a realm where religion was very, very dominant and was very, very powerful and was very, very prevalent to people's lives. And if you had the wrong type of leaders in certain churches or whatever, or the churches felt some sort of threat, we already went through 1307 and 1314. Look at what Hitler did. Freemasons have been persecuted as well, and killed and stuff like that during history. So we had to be careful. There were people who would use us as propaganda to swell their ranks and create fear, even though everything is false. And so it's really interesting. It really, really is interesting, where it's about bringing good men together and making them better men through good fellowship, through going through the degree work, and giving faith, hope, and charity to the communities, and just being a better man. And all the lodges, I said, are dedicated to St. John the Baptist. And when you become a Knights Templar, you're defending the Christian faith, and you got to be a Christian to join that order, basically. And so why would you be a Christian and join the order if all these allegations, had an iota of relevance? So now, however, though, there have been clandestine places where people have done, they couldn't get in or whatever, and they made their own versions up, and then they give us a bad name. But yeah, that's my long answer to your thing. But I think it's very important to spell that out and give people the truth as much as we can, and go through some more episodes. But this episode was myth busting. We wanted to bust a couple of the myths. We don't just have, we'll go through some more myth busting. I just want to make sure that everything I give is accurate, basically, and you have to look at how likely things are on the Richter scale, and do they match up in the timelines, and do they make sense, and what is the angle? Is this trying to publicize something? Are things being weaved to push a certain agenda, or are these just certain facts that just coincide with each other and actually gel and stick really hard, that it's just so you just can't avoid it because it's in your face, and you just got it's there. You just got to do the research. So there you go. Any thoughts, Billy?
Yeah, stick with us, guys, because I know what 90% of us, including myself, want. We want to talk about the heroic battles. That's what we want, Sam. That's what we want. We got to make this happen. So we're going to do an episode on that, I'm sure, coming up soon. And thank you. I can't thank you enough for coming and joining spending your time with us, because it means a lot to us. It means a lot to our show. And like and share it with your friends and subscribe, if you will. It helps us and it helps us grow. And we'll keep bringing you the best content we are able to do. Godspeed, everyone.
Thank you for listening to On the Level Podcast, your Masonic podcast. When you are ready, duly and truly prepared, you can always knock on the door.